What can I say about Tenet? Well, convoluted and incoherent don't even begin to describe this complete fucking mess of a film. Sloppy pacing, banal dialogue, and boring, undeveloped, and even inconsistent characters didn't help the film even in the slightest. But I want to take a step back before I get more into this and talk a bit about Christopher Nolan. With someone like Nolan, I notice frequently two distinct sides. The side that sucks the fart right out of his asshole and thinks of him as the one true god of cinema, and the other side who claims he's a talentless, overrated hack. I personally think both sides are stupid. I am myself a fan of Christopher Nolan, at least earlier in his career. I absolutely love his films Memento, Insomnia, Batman Begins, The Prestige, and The Dark Knight. But one thing I notice about Nolan is the more popular he gets, the more sloppy his scripts become. How did he go from writing scenes like this...
Take it easy. This has nothing to do with me.
Well, maybe it does. How the fuck would you know? You don't know a fucking thing. You can't get scared, but hey, can you get angry?
Yes.
Oh, you pathetic piece of shit. I can say whatever the fuck I want, and you won't have a fucking clue, you fucking retard.
Shut your mouth.
You know what? I'm gonna use you. I'm telling you now because I'm gonna enjoy it so much more if I know that you could stop me if you weren't such a fucking freak. Did you lose your pen? Well, that's too bad, freak. Otherwise, you could write yourself a little note about how much Natalie hates your retarded guts and that I called your wife a fucking whore.
Hey, don't say another fucking word.
About your whore of a wife? I read about your condition, Leonard. You know what one of the causes of short-term memory loss is? Venereal disease. Maybe your cunt of a fucking wife sucked one too many diseased cocks and turned you into a fucking retard. You sad freak. I can say whatever the fuck I want, and you won't remember. We'll still be best friends. Or maybe even lovers. I'll see you soon.
To this.
You say it, don't spread it, Rob. It's a sphere. Well, of course it is. What you thought it would just be a hole. No, it's just that all the illustrations I've ever seen, the illustrations. I'll show you how it works. So they say you want to go from here to there, but it's too far, right? Mm-hmm. So a wormhole bends space like this, so you can take a shortcut through a higher dimension. Okay, so to show that, they've turned three-dimensional space into two dimensions, which turns a wormhole into two dimensions. A circle. What's a circle in three dimensions? Sphere. Exactly. A spherical hole. But who put it there? Who do we have to thank? I'm not thanking anybody until we get out of here in one piece, Ron.
It's absolutely night and day. I see the same thing with Quentin Tarantino, funny enough. Both these directors started off their careers with such promise, but by getting too successful, both turned into self-indulgent hacks who write sloppy at best scripts. Now on to Tenet. I'll put it bluntly, the plot makes absolutely no sense in any way, shape, or form. And yes, I know this is where the fanboys will come out and talk about how the only reason I didn't understand it was because of my intellectual deficiency, especially compared with them, the genius fanboys. But consider this, fanboys. Nolan put a line in this film early on, said by one of the characters explaining the plot to the main character. The line was, "Don't try to understand it, just experience it." Now, if that's not a not-so-subtle foreshadowing of the confusing bullshit we were about to see, nothing is. I mean, come on. The character literally says not to understand it to the protagonist of the story, aka the person who the audience experiences the story through. So if he doesn't understand it, no one does. Also, on a side note, the amount of times the protagonist refers to himself as the protagonist was beyond annoying, but that's a small point. Now back to the dumbass line. I got news for you, Nolan. You ain't David Lynch. A film like Inland Empire, or to a lesser extent Eraserhead, are not necessarily meant to be understood, but to be experienced. But those films, unlike this film, are not story or exposition driven, and are more like visceral, dreamlike experiences. Nolan had a nasty habit in this film to change his mind on what type of film he wanted it to be. Do you want this to be a visually interesting, chaotic action film, or do you want to be a story and character-driven film with lots of exposition? You can't have it both ways. Let me put it another way. On the one hand, one of his characters literally says not to understand it, but to experience it. On the other hand, he has characters vomit shit tons of exposition out loud in many ugly paragraphs as to attempt to get the audience to maybe sort of, but not really understand it. Make up your mind! It doesn't help that the exposition is said so fucking fast and in such dense paragraphs that trying to comprehend it all before the scene was done without having the ability to pause or add subtitles made it an impossibility. Other problems with this film. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the characters are terrible. They are either boring and superficial or inconsistent like the main character. John David Washington was very bad in this film, and I'm not sure if he's to blame or Nolan. As for the first 30 minutes, I thought he was going for like a stoic, reserved type of character, but then later on he started wisecracking and being a smartass. It was very jarring. Pattinson and Brana do the best with what they're given, I'll give them that, but that's the highest praise I'd give to them. Lastly, the pacing was jaggy as fuck. It starts off pretty well actually with an exciting action scene, but then it cuts from that to just tons of exposition heavy scenes and or action scenes with no sense of build up at all. This point, I will admit, is a little hard to articulate, but just watch the film and you will see what I mean. One last thing I will say is how poorly executed and just cringy some scenes are. There's a scene where a character has to chloroform someone else and I almost burst out laughing in the theater. Like the guy legit just passes out before the rag even reaches his mouth. And there was no struggle. Sorry, Nolan, that's not how chloroform works. One other scene that almost caused me to die of laughter would be when the protagonist has to stop a car that's going well over 100 miles per hour with just his hand. And the second he lightly pushes down on the pedal, and I emphasize, with his hand, the car just magically stops right before hitting traffic. I don't know how no one told Nolan how stupid that looked. In conclusion, Tenet is not only Nolan's worst film, but it's the film that cemented in me that the man I fell in love with, who made some of my favorite films of this century, is dead, and has been replaced by a hack who thinks that bigger is better, and does not have any of his sloppy, nonsensical ideas challenged. Tenet is a boring, confusing, incoherent piece of shit. The end.